knowledge and information out and treating them like theological textbooks. And that has its benefits, but it's not where things really lie, because the basic thing of Christianity is relationship, not knowledge. But this knowledge was good. And like I said, we didn't learn anything about spiritual warfare or demons or anything like that. I remember there was a section in our theology textbook on Satan and demons, but we never got to that section. The term was over before we got there. The professor said, you'll just have to do that on your own. And of course we didn't, because you don't do anything in school unless you're going to be examined on it. And since there was no examination, we didn't do it. Anyway, there I am at university, and this is a Christian school, and so I'm trying to figure out how to prepare for Africa. And I started asking people, okay, what do I specialize in? And somebody said literature. That didn't make any sense to me. Somebody said history. Somebody said Greek. You got to get into the Bible. Finally, I met somebody who was going to be a missionary, and I said, what do you specialize in? He said, anthropology. And I said, what's that? He said, well, the way the disciplines are divided, you've got all of these different kinds of study dealing with Western ideas and Western society, and there's only one that's dedicated to understanding the other thousands of cultures of the world. And if you're planning on going to one or another of these, then that's the one you want to study. It made sense to me. Again, things were simple in those days. So I majored in anthropology. And we learned all kinds of things about culture, and since this was a Christian institution, our concern was how do we communicate Christianity within the cultures of other people. And that was really good. It set me up for a life of understanding and difficulty. Understanding where people are coming from, and that God wants to enter the only way of life that they've ever known. That is their cultural life, and to become real to them in that context, as opposed to the ordinary missionary approach, which is go there, start a school to teach them how to be like us. This is the mistake that was made by the people talked about in Acts 15. They assumed that the culture within which they came to Christ was the only vehicle through which anybody should come to Christ. And so they set themselves to convert people to Jewish culture as a means of coming to Christ. And when we got to Nigeria, we found out that this is exactly what our mission was doing. Partly, at least, because they saw spiritual power in these other societies and didn't know what to do with it. And since you don't know how to handle it, you condemn it. And so we had this principle of condemning things and then teaching against them, and then letting people make their own choice, make their own decisions. And so we had quite a number of Nigerian American Christians. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, from some points of view, we were assigned to a tribal group where the gospel was brand new. And we were given the impression that we could work in the ways that we had learned to work, that is, work from within the culture rather than fighting against the culture. By this time, both myself and my wife had studied anthropology, and we'd gotten into linguistics too, with the idea that we would go out and learn an unwritten language and reduce it to writing and then translate the Bible. into the language of that people. We got to this group of people. Well, before we got to them, we learned the trade language. It's called Hausa, H-A-U-S-A. Anybody here can speak Hausa? It's not so popular here anymore. Are you serious? De kyau? Kai. Kazama Nigeria ko? Lost him maybe, I don't know. Okay. Did well on the first few, he fooled me. You lived in Nigeria a bit, have you? Niger. Oh, de kyau. Anyway, we learned the trade language. They gave us 4 months to learn it before the first people came out that we had to teach it to. And that's pretty good. We begged them not to send us to language school because we knew how to learn it ourselves better than they could do it in language school. And so literally after 4 months I started teaching it. That's when you really learn it. And then we moved up into the bush and began working among the people we call Kamwe, and trying to find out what their cultural life was all about, and to introduce them to the Jesus who could have incarnated in their culture rather than in Jewish culture. And they took to this. It was very good. And the people started flocking to Christ, and the church started growing. And pretty soon, the needs of the church were so great that my wife and I gave up learning their language in order to help them. I was baptizing 150, 200 people at a time. And I mentioned that I belonged to two denominations. Well, the denomination that I was with in Nigeria, we baptized with a vengeance. We dunked people 3 times. These are people that are scared to death to have their heads go underwater, so they really knew what this death to life thing was all about. Unfortunately, in those muddy pools where I was baptizing, I wasn't alone. I don't know why God made bloodsuckers. Anyway, whenever they have a blood drive, I say, no thanks, I gave in Nigeria. Because by the time you do 150 people 3 times each, you lose a lot of blood. But it was worth it. The people they really got excited about Jesus in their own culture. And we were happily going along. We had Christian dances. And I was brought up in a kind of Christianity that said Christians don't dance. So I never learned how to dance. But music was a very big part of these people's life. And we got to a point where the leader said, well, we need some Christian hymns. Would you help us translate them? And I said, what do you mean by hymns? They said, well, like they sing over in such and such a place, such and such a place. And I said, where else do you hear that music? And they said, well, it comes over the radio from Western sources and everything. I said, so that's Western music? He said, yeah. Isn't that Christian? I said, what do you think? I said, don't you have any music of your own? Oh yeah, we got music of our own. Do you think that God would be honored if you used your music to worship Him? Well, nobody ever told us that before. I said, why don't you do your own music? And they started. And it was great. And of course, in this part of Africa, you don't sing without wiggling. Your whole body goes with it. In fact, they don't even have a distinction. Their word for singing includes dancing. So they had problems when the mission said you can dance with your voice, but not with your body. But we were a little bit isolated, and so they began singing and dancing their faith. And one time, one of the evangelists came back from the mountain. There was a mountain there. Well, we call it a mountain. It was 2,000 feet higher than where we were, but very rugged hills. And this guy got up there where the gospel had never been heard before. And they started singing these songs, and the chief says, "Stop, stop, stop." This evangelist told me, he said, "I thought we were going to get kicked out of there." The chief says, "Where'd you get these songs?" I said, "Well, we sing them down around the mission compound down there all the time." He said, "Oh." He said, our young girls have been singing these songs for months. Every month when the moon was full, they would have their monthly dances, and they would, their typical dances would be, "Yeah, I saw somebody out with so-and-so," and this kind of thing. Now they're singing about Jesu Christi. And the chief says, who is this Jesu Christi they're talking about? Is that the missionary? They assured him it wasn't the missionary. But the exciting thing is that the songs that they had been constructing, worshiping Jesus, were preceding the preachers, preceding these evangelists as they were going out. And the people were prepared for the gospel because there was worship going on in their own language, in their own vernacular, their own ways of doing things. When we first got to this area, the leaders said, "How many times a month do you want to preach?" I said, "None." They said, "You must not have understood this. You want to preach twice a month?" I said, "No." "Once a month?" "No." "Can't you preach?" I said, "Yeah, I can preach good. I got A's in preaching class." They were hard to get. They said, "Then why won't you preach?" I said, "Because it's your church. It's not mine. And God wants you to have it right from the beginning. He doesn't want me to take it, to start it and then turn it over to you, like is done in the rest of the mission. This is between you and God. And anyway, I know the trade language, but I don't know your language. And this needs to be in your language, because that's the language that God wants to speak to you." And they said, "Well, what are you going to do? Out here on a holiday or what?" He says, "The missionary always preaches for us." And I said, "Well, this one isn't going to." I don't know what kind of discussions they had when I was out of earshot, but this really puzzled them a lot. Here's this missionary wasn't going to do anything. They said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "What do you want me to do?" They said, "We need Bible study." I said, "Okay. When do we have it?" They said, "When do we come to your house?" I said, "My house? When do I go to yours?" So they set a time, and we sat down to have Bible study. And some really interesting things happened then. For one thing, we read a passage, and they looked at me and said, "What does it mean?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "You don't know? What kind of a missionary are you? A missionary always tells us what it means." I said, "Well, this one's not going to." So again, they said, "Well, what are you here for?" "I thought you were here for Bible study." I said, "What does it mean to you?" They said, "What's that got to do with it?"